Welcome to our Transaction Desk webinar. First of all, just a few housekeeping items. My name is Chris Lumia. I will be presenting today. We will stop periodically, maybe every 5 to 10 minutes after each topic. I'll see if there are any common questions that I can address, but we will also try to answer the questions in the panel throughout the webinar. What we're going to do today, Transaction Desk is a very large, very powerful product. So I'm going to show you some of the main functions. There is a new interface of Transaction Desk. That's part of the reason why we have this webinar today. For those of you who are using Transaction Desk already, maybe you're using some functions, just 1 or 2 functions, you want to learn more. Not only will we show you the full view of what it can do, but also we'll show you this new look. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Once again, thank you all for attending. So I am at the mfrlogin.com page, the single sign-on login with all of the MFR products and services. I have a button over here that says Transaction Desk. So I can click this, and now it automatically takes me into the new version, the new interface. But not only that, it brings in all of my work. It brings in my transaction files, the forms that I've worked with already, any templates that I've built already, and your quick start groups are now all called templates. So not only does it come over, but it brings it over my work as well. So a few things to point out with this new interface. Cleaner look, a little bit more modern look, more modern coding, faster. It's a mobile-friendly interface. You can actually use this on any mobile device now. And at first comes this page. It is an integrated single dashboard. So I am actually able to customize this dashboard. Just like in Matrix, where I have a dashboard where I first log in, that welcome page with all of my, what we call them, widgets. I can move them around. Same thing with Transaction Desk. But to do that, I have to actually unlock the dashboard. So I come over here to my padlock icon, unlock it. Now I can move around these widgets. I can close out widgets I don't want. I can come up here. This is called a stoplight menu. And whenever you see the stoplight menu, it gives you menu options. So click this. Oh, I can show additional widgets. I can now pull these additional widgets into my dashboard. And I can once again move things around. When I'm done, I lock the dashboard back down. Notice as well, a really nice feature of the new version of Transaction Desk is that you have this help icon. Whenever you see this, that means there is a link to a tutorial video. Most of these videos are less than 1 minute. So here's a quick video on how to customize your dashboard, to move, resize widgets, add widgets. So at any time that you're using Transaction Desk, you're able to go towards these automatically integrated, automatically linked help videos. So that's the dashboard page. But the other thing to point out, on the side of your screen, and you'll always see this is static, you have your full comprehensive menu of various options in Transaction Desk. So for those of you who are more visual, here are the icons. If you hover over the icon, it tells you what each of these means. So let's see, here's my Task Manager, my Authentisign, my DocBox. But another option, if I click up here on my hamburger icon, it switches to a list view. It expands this side. And now instead of just seeing the image, I actually see what all of these different images and what all these different icons mean. Oh, here's my Transaction Manager, my Task Manager, my Form Library, my Authentisign, my DocBox. So what we're going to do today, we're going to actually go over some of these different menu options, and I do want to show you really what the possibilities are for Transaction Desk. Now, this is a 1-hour training. This is a very powerful product. You will not leave this webinar an expert, but my hope is that you leave this webinar excited about what Transaction Desk can do. Then it will be up to you to log back in, play around, click around these different options, see what you can do. And I do think that by exploring in this product, you're going to be surprised at all that is at your disposal. So as we explore this menu, I'm going to actually jump around a little bit. I'm not going to go top to bottom. I want to start by taking you to the setup menu. My suggestion when you first start playing around in TransactionDesk, set it up first. Set your preferences. So we're going to go to Setup. And now we see all of these options, things that I can set up, things that I can configure. So first of all, under Setup, I have my preferences. This might be the first thing you do, where you update your user information. And most of this will have carried over, but if you want to add anything to it, update your office information, your email signature. So when you send an email out through TransactionDesk, what does your signature look like? Your branding. You can upload a photo, upload your company logo. So here is where you can set up things that are tied to you. Set up TransactionDesk so that it has your most up-to-date information. Then I'm going to skip down a few. We're not going to go over all of these setup options because this will take us a long time. As you see, there's a lot of options on here. Let's look at the option for clauses. So a few items down. Clauses allow you to pre-type in any clause that you frequently use in multiple contracts, whether or not they're in listing agreements, in your contracts for sale and purchase. So anything that you need there, you can go into clauses. And I can actually build clauses. Anytime in the future when I use a certain contract, I can automatically insert the clause into the contract. So you'll see here I've already built in an inspection clause. And I'm just doing this as an example. This is just a sample I'm giving. I built this in up to 20,000 characters, and now I can quickly, with the click of a button, put this clause into any contract that I write. If I click Add, I can add a new one. So we're going to call this Sample from Webinar. This is a sample clause that we will put into a contract later. So I'm going to type this clause and save it. And now it's available for me to use in the future. Now brokers can actually type clauses for the entire office to use. That's another thing we can do under our setup menu, type these clauses. Skip down a few. Let's now come to the checklist manager. So this is nice. This is something that is very helpful in TransactionDesk. In the previous version, you had something called an activity plan. When you create a transaction, you can apply an activity plan to it, where it just gives you a to-do list, all the different things you have to do for different types of transactions. Create as many as you want. Create one for when you work with buyers, for sellers, for when you have a single-family home listing, a condo listing, and the different steps you have to take. Oh, well, I have to get the listing agreement signed. I have to get the MLS data entry form signed, enter the listing at the MLS, follow up with the seller a week later. It's whatever you might need to do. So I can now create a new checklist, and we're going to call this our sample listing checklist from Webinar. And you can name it whatever you want, and brokers can also create a checklist for the entire office to use. So in this checklist, we're going to create this. I can describe this if I want. But now I'm going to add items to this checklist. So I'm saying, okay, when I have a listing, these are the items that I have to complete. These are the steps that I have to take. So I'm going to add. I'm going to add an item. The first thing I have to do is get a signed listing agreement. And that actually requires a document. So I'll check this document box. And that way when I go to the transaction file, when I go to the checklist, it will require me to add in the document. If I want, I can even make this mandatory. So I'll create this item. And maybe I will also do this for broker review. My broker has to review this. I can check this off. Save. I just save that item, a mandatory item that requires me to upload a document. Add a new checklist item. Next, another document that's mandatory. I need the MLS data entry form. Save. Going to add another one. This is a task. So now I'm going to add in a task. I have the listing agreement. I have the MLS data entry form. So now I have to actually enter the listing into the MLS. And I'm going to set a due date for this task related to a transaction date. This is going to be due after the list date and 2 days after. I can even set reminders in here. So I just created this checklist, which I can now apply to any transaction in the future. Let me go ahead. I have a few questions that came in. I will go ahead and address some of these. How do I add company-specific disclosures and our lease to automatically pre-fill details and signatures? Okay, so a few things. If you have a company-specific document, you can actually add that as a document into your transaction file. We will look at that a few steps down. When you create a template, you can actually go into all the forms and contracts. You can insert your clauses. You can insert some information. And that information you insert into the forms or contracts will automatically show up in that template in the future. So let's hold that thought, because I am going to show you some examples of this when we actually build a transaction. That was a great question. That's one of the nice things in TransactionDesk is that when you create these templates, you're actually able to put in your company-specific information. So we'll look at that next. So under the Setup menu, we looked at how under Preferences, we can do our email signature, we can put in our branding. Then we looked at how we can set up clauses if our office or if I use a clause in all my listing agreements or all my contracts for purchase or sale, I can actually type in those clauses to save me time ahead in the future. Checklist Manager, I can create a checklist so whenever I have a certain type of transaction, I know the items that I generally follow. Now let's look at transaction templates. So here's where I actually create my templates. Whenever I have a listing, whenever I have a buyer, whenever I have a condo listing or single-family home listing, whatever it might be, I can actually apply a template to it where I automatically have the forms that I need in here. So I'm going to add a new template. And we'll just call this sample listing template from webinar. And this is a residential listing. Save this. And now it takes me through a wizard, so I can add a checklist to this template. Okay, well this is easy. I'm going to add a checklist to it. We just created a listing checklist. Let's go ahead and add that to this template. This way, whenever I create a new transaction and I apply the listing template to it, this checklist will automatically be in here. I do want to say, these templates and even these checklists are modifiable. So if you want to, maybe you put in some standard contracts and forms, but you know what? This is a listing in the 55 plus community. I now need the housing for older persons rider. You can always add things into here later. I can add contacts that I always want to show up in a certain type of transaction. And now over here, I can add both forms and documents into the transaction. Forms are the pre-programmed contracts and forms that you can add from TransactionDesk. They're in various categories. You have your Fannie Mae forms, your Florida Realtor agency disclosures, the Florida Realtor commercial forms, property management forms and lease agreements, the CRISP contract, the FAR-BAR contract, all of the My Florida Regional MLS forms, including the listing data entry forms, including the listing waiver form. So that's one option. A document is static. So a document might be something that your office has or uses, something that you distribute to all customers. So that's the difference between forms and documents. Forms are the programmed contracts that are already in TransactionDesk. Documents is something static that you add in addition to these forms. So let's go ahead, let's add in some forms. Since this is a listing, the first thing I want in every transaction file I create is my listing agreement. So I can either type in what I need, type in listing agreement up here in the search box, or search by category. I want the Florida Realtor agency disclosures and listing agreements. So let's see, I'm going to go ahead and add in the exclusive right of sale listing agreement for a transaction broker, or whatever you use, add. And you know what? I also want to go ahead and add in the MLS data entry form. So now I'm going to add a new form under My Florida Regional MLS. I have the residential data entry form or commercial or rental data entry form. And let's go ahead to round this out. I will go ahead and add in the seller disclosure form. So I can either come to the agency disclosures, or I can just type in seller disclosure up here, seller property disclosure. So now I have those forms in this template. Whenever I create a listing file in the future, add this template, these forms will be in there. Now let's go ahead and throw in some documents. So I can add documents from either my computer, I can add it from my DocBox account. DocBox is the cloud-based storage that comes with TransactionDesk. We'll explore that later. I can add it from one of my other cloud drives. I can go ahead, I can add this from DocBox because I already have some items in here. But you might want to add straight from your computer. A few static documents. And now these are in here to apply to future transactions. Back to the setup menu. So we looked at the preferences, we looked at billing clauses, we looked at billing templates and checklists. I can build what are called share groups, where I can actually build a group to share transaction files with others in my office. Maybe I have an assistant who enters all listings for me, so when I create a transaction, I have to share it with the assistant, whatever I might need to do. I can add in service providers. These are my vendors, people who I use frequently, my roofer, my appraiser, my inspector, my insurance agent, my attorney. And that way, whenever I need to order a service, I can do it straight from TransactionDesk from the transaction file. When I create a new service provider, I put in their phone number, their email, their fax, and I can actually send an email straight out from the transaction file. We'll look at that later. So once again, these are the various things you can do under setup. I do encourage you, probably when you first get into here, go ahead and come to the setup, build your clauses, build your templates, build your checklists. This will make your life a lot easier when you start using TransactionDesk. We got a question, what is a super user? A super user is just a fancy name for either brokers or office administrators who have office level access to TransactionDesk. Let's see. Is there a way to add action buttons to the checklist, or is it simply text that appears? No, you can't really do action buttons, but if you are adding a document to your checklist, you're actually able to, you will be prompted to upload the document. So pretty much with a checklist, for the documents, you're prompted to upload the document. For any other task, I have to enter the listing at the MLS, send the follow-up email, you actually manually mark the task as completed. We'll look at that later. We'll see what these checklists look like when we go into a transaction file. So let's see. Now let's go ahead and come back to our menu on the side of the page, and let's go to the contacts menu. So here are all of the contacts that I added to TransactionDesk. My buyers, my sellers, even maybe some third parties. I can click Add to add a new contact. I can filter my contacts by category, by buyer, by seller, by agents, by my contacts versus office contacts. And if I want to add a new one, I can create a contact and simply just go through this wizard, 3 different tabs, put in all the information for my contact. This is separate from your matrix contacts. So in matrix, you add in your contacts, but TransactionDesk will be separate. You can also add contacts in straight from a transaction file. Now let's look at the instant forms. Once again, I am jumping around a little bit. I'm not going from top to bottom order because I want to show you kind of the most logical order of how we can build all this. So we're going to look at the forms and how to work with individual forms, but then we're going to pull all of this together and we're going to build a transaction where we use the templates that we've built already. We'll use our checklists, we'll use our clauses, we'll look at how forms work within a transaction. But if I just simply need to get a form, I don't need to build a transaction file. I just need a listing agreement form. I need an owner waiver of MLS entry form because I need to have permission to not put a listing in the MLS for a few weeks to get repairs done. Whatever it might be, I can come here to Instant Forms and I can work with individual forms. And we saw this menu when we were building our transaction template, how I can actually search for a form through the search box. Once again, you always have these little help videos and icons. Or I can choose a form by category. So in this case, maybe I want to come to the My Florida Regional MLS forms, and I want the owner waiver of MLS entry form. We have an education campaign going around about this form, but it's very important to note that if ever you need to not put a listing in the MLS, whether or not it's for repairs or for waiting for photos or whatever it might be, you only have 2 business days to enter a listing into the MLS, unless you have this owner waiver of MLS entry form signed by the seller. And here's where you can get the form, along with other places. It's linked in Matrix as well. I can come here under the shading, under the folder, viewing owner's waiver of MLS entry. Come to the stoplight menu. And remember, whenever you see the stoplight menu, you can see options. So I can either preview this form, download this form, or create a new form. And when I create a new form, I can create an actual transaction file from it. I can add it to an existing transaction, or in this case, maybe I don't use TransactionDesk very frequently. I just want to create a standalone form. Those are all of your options. So in this case, I'm creating a standalone form. I now have a fillable PDF. I can type in the information. For this particular form, please note that you have separate fields for each part of the address. Fill this out. I can send it through Authentisign to get signed by the seller. I can come to File, Send. I can send it by email, send it by fax. I can save the form. I can print the form. I can change the font. For certain forms, any form with a multi-line text field, I can add a clause to it. And under transaction, I can actually add this form to a transaction after the fact or create a new transaction from this form. So that's how you can work with individual forms. And there are some cases where you will want to work with an individual form. If you're not using the full TransactionDesk functions or the transaction files, you just like to work with forms individually. Your office has something different. That's fine. But for those of you who do want to use this as a more comprehensive transaction management system, well, the next section of this training is for you, because we're now going to look at the actual TransactionDesk Transaction Manager. So I'm going to click here on my menu, the second icon down, TransactionDesk. This takes me to all of my existing transaction files. And I can change the view. There's several menu options up here. I can change to a grid view where I can actually see little icons for each transaction. Switch back to list. I can filter my transactions out by sellers or by listings, or by listings or by buyers. I can sort my transactions, watch a variety of videos, and if I click Add, I can add a new transaction. So we're going to create a new transaction. Listing for 330 webinar. So I'm going to title this transaction. However you want to title it, it's up to you. The seller or buyer's name, the address, whatever it might be. And I can then have the question, do I want to apply a template to this transaction? Yes or no? Well, yes, I do in fact want to use a template. I just created a template earlier today, the sample listing template for this webinar, and we're going to apply this template that we built earlier to this transaction. Do I want to import data? Yes or no? Yes, I do. I have 3 options. Do I want to import data from MFCRE, our Commercial Information Exchange, for commercial listings or commercial buyers or tenants? Do I want to import data from the MLS, from My Florida Regional MLS? If you're working with a buyer, perhaps, and you're getting ready to do a contract, you can import the data in from the listing. Oh, and by the way, in Matrix, in a listing, if you click the TransactionDesk icon on top of your Matrix listings, it takes you to the same place. It takes you to this wizard where you can create a transaction from a listing. Or in this case, we have a listing, or we're getting a listing. It's not in the MLS yet. I can actually import data from Realist, from the tax records. So I'll choose Realist, choose my county. So this listing, let's say Pinellas County. And then tax ID, well, if I don't have the tax ID memorized, which I probably don't, I can click search. And now I can search for the street number, street name, select, street number, street name, search. Now it pulls up that listing. Choose the one I want. Now I say select. And I said use wizard here. So now when I say create, it takes me to a wizard where I can finish creating this transaction. I also have to say who I am. I, in this case, am the listing agent. So that's how you originally create a transaction file. You name it. You have the choice of applying a template to it. You have a choice of importing data from either the MLS or from the tax records. Add yourself as the listing agent or selling agent, neither or both. And now it takes you through this 5-step wizard. So the first step of this wizard puts in property detail. So I can put in the address, I can put in the subdivision, the list price, let's just make something up. Any other information. Click next. I can put in some transaction dates, so the list date, let's say 3/30/2016. Expiration date, let's say, let's just pretend that it's only for a few months. Expires in July or August. So any other dates I have. Now, if I populate from the MLS, these dates would have carried over from the MLS listing, or at least the list date would have from the MLS listing. Next, contacts. So it actually pulled in the seller from the tax records. Pulled in myself as the listing agent and my company as the listing broker. Now, if I want to manually add a contact, I just simply click add. And I can now create a new contact or add from existing TransactionDesk contacts. So maybe if I had a buyer already, I can add the buyer in as well. Next. Remember, I actually populated this from a template. So all of the forms that I put into that template are automatically in here. However, if I want to add new forms, once again, maybe I need to add in a different listing agreement. Maybe I need to add in some additional disclosures, maybe the web-based paint disclosure or something else, or a single disclosure. I can click Add New and add any other forms to here. I added in some documents under the transaction. Remember, documents are static. They're not programmed into TransactionDesk. They're items from my office. And TransactionDesk always gives you a fax back cover sheet. We'll look at that later. We'll see what that is. And then I'll say Done. So here is the transaction. If I were to just go straight to the transaction icon and go into the transaction, this is where it takes me, to the transaction dashboard. Just like how I can redo the dashboard in the overall version of TransactionDesk, I can also modify my individual transaction dashboard. I can move things around. I can add more widgets to my dashboard. Lock it back down when I'm done. On the top, you have another stoplight menu. So click here. It gives me all these options I can do for this overall transaction. I can share this transaction. Maybe I need to share it with the office assistant who's going to enter the listing for me. Maybe I need to add notes to it, duplicate it. I did not use a template maybe. I want to add a template after the fact, or I want to create a template from this transaction. Import data, archive or delete it. So all of that can be done under the stoplight menu on the top. But we also we see this hamburger icon again where you can expand. Click here, and now I have all of these different steps that I can walk through for this transaction. Go back to the dashboard. Do the property detail again. Maybe add more information into the property detail. And I now, we have a contract, so I want to add in the contract date. So I can update the price, update the transaction dates, whatever I might need to do here. Look at the contacts for this transaction. Add contacts in after the fact. After I go through the wizard to create this, I can now go in and add more contacts. forms. So here are all of my transaction forms, and once again, I can add new forms. Well, here's the fun part. I go into any of these forms, and now these are populated for me from the tax records, because I populated this transaction from the tax records. Not everything has been filled out. I still have to fill out anything that's more specific, but information about the property has already been populated. That probably saved me a good few minutes, and that adds up over time. And once again, with any of these forms, you can send it via email, fax, e-signings, add a watermark to the form, a confidential or draft watermark, save it as a PDF, save it overall, change the font, change the color. And here's something that's neat. So let's come down to the additional terms box, the multi-line text field. I click on clause, and now I can take one of my clauses. Let's use the sample clause from the webinar that we did earlier on this webinar, add it. And now I just automatically added a clause into this contract. Easy as that. You can go ahead and exit out this one. Let's also look at this MLS form, the data entry form. Because this is neat, you have to fill out this form anyway before you enter listing the MLS. So right now, there is kind of a double entry. You have to fill out this form, then you have to go and enter listing the MLS. Well, right now, first of all, by putting this form in TransactionDesk, some fields have already been populated for me. And when I'm done filling it out, now I have an option. There's a button up here that says Upload Listing. If I click this button, this automatically goes into Matrix as an incomplete listing. So I want to show this again. If you use the My Florida Regional MLS data entry form in TransactionDesk, fill it out. Some of the work's already been done. Some fields have already been populated from the tax records. I simply have to say Upload Listing, and boom, just like that, this form translates into an incomplete listing in Matrix. All I have to do now is to go in, I have to add in the photos and activate the listing. Now, if I do not enter my own listings, if someone in my office enters listings for me, remember, you also have the option anytime to fill out this form in TransactionDesk and then come up here and share the transaction. Share it with the person in your office who enters your listings, and then they have access to that button to upload the listing into Matrix. So that's just one of the other neat features in TransactionDesk. I'm also looking at these forms. If I select multiple forms, notice that they appear in this basket up here. Come to this basket, I have several bulk options. I can actually zip these forms together, merge these into a single PDF document, email out all three of these, fax all three of these. Then I come down to documents. So documents are the static items. Maybe it's something that my office puts together. Maybe it's some information that I like to give to a buyer or a seller. I also automatically have in each transaction a fax back cover sheet. So go into this fax back cover sheet, and what this does, in Florida, we still rely on fax pretty heavily, and TransactionDesk actually teases us about that, and we use fax more than anywhere else in the nation. But that's fine. Hey, however you need to communicate with your customers. But if your customer uses fax and you're on the road, if they use this cover sheet to fax things to you, what's going to end up happening, this barcode will digitize the fax and not only email it to you versus send it through a fax machine, but also whatever they fax to you will automatically be filed under the documents for this transaction. So a pretty neat feature. If you are going to have someone use fax, you might as well have them send it to you in such a way that gets emailed to you and automatically gets filed in TransactionDesk. And let's see, we had some questions come in. So yes, these transactions can populate either from the tax records or from the MLS. And you can actually, that data entry form can go directly from TransactionDesk into the MLS. So you do not have to enter, you do not have to fill out the form and then go and enter the listing into the MLS. Do it all in one step. So that is a pretty neat feature. It was just released a few months ago. Let's see, then we have the whatever document you have in here. So I put in something that's called a sample document to slice. Not the most creative document name. I did want to show you. I do want to show you how you can slice or mark up a document. So I'm going to come to the Stoplight menu for any of my forms or any of my documents. And I'm able to preview a document, download it, send it, rename it. But also I have the option to slice or mark up either a form or a document. So I come here to slice/markup. If I slice, this allows me to reorder the pages, especially for a PDF document that's static. It's kind of nice because if I need to reorder how these pages look, I simply click, drag and drop. I move things around. I can remove pages. I can rotate pages. So just a good way for me to work with documents. I also have the option to mark documents up. So especially a PDF document that's static, if I choose the markup tools, I can get a text box. I can type into the document. I can use this pen. I can circle something. Oh, and if I right-click, I can even change the shading. So maybe I want to change this to green. I can cross things out. I can highlight. So I have all these markup tools. A text box, a pen, a circle, a highlighter, a line to cross things out. So this could be useful for counter offers. It could be useful for marking up documents, whatever I need to do. I can do this straight in TransactionDesk. So once again, what I would do there, go into whatever document I want to slice or mark up and say slice/markup. Another thing, in terms of version control, say if I want to upload a new version of this document, I simply say upload a revision, and then I am able to upload a newer version, and I can actually view the history of all revisions for this document. So we looked through under the side here, we looked at the property detail, contacts, forms, and documents for a transaction. But now let's come into the checklist for this transaction. Because we built a checklist earlier, we put the checklist in our template, and now I have my 3 checklist items. So some of these are documents. For example, I have to get the listing agreement signed, and here I'm required to actually upload the document. I have to get the MLS data entry form signed, then upload the document, because I actually put these in as documents that have to be uploaded. So this pretty much forces me to make sure that I put in every document that I need, every signed document that I need in this transaction file. Then I have a task. A task is something manual, calling someone, entering something, sending a follow-up, scheduling an appointment, whatever it might be. So I have to enter the listing into the MLS by 3/31, which is 2 days after the list date. When that's done, I can simply come here to click here to mark as complete. I can add new tasks. I can delete a task on here. I can download this checklist as a PDF document. So that's the checklist. But if you want to separate out just the tasks on your checklist, just the things that you have to physically do that are not documents, if you come to the task item on your transaction, it pulls up just the tasks for this transaction. Once again, I can download as a PDF. I can also view in calendar view. So click this little calendar icon, and now it shows me on the calendar when I have to do certain functions for this transaction. Under signings, here's where I can manage any Authentisign signings for this transaction. We will actually do a sample in Authentisign a little later. I can view the history of this transaction, when it was created, when it was modified. I can launch a service order. I showed you a little earlier how under the setup menu, you have a place where you can create service providers, your inspector, your insurance agent, whatever it might be. So now if I have to order a service, I simply say add. Let's see, I want to order an inspection, and Ivan Inspector is the vendor. I program these vendors in under the setup menu. Go in, I put in the details, I upload any supplementary documents, and under delivery, I can either email this to Ivan, fax it to Ivan, or I can actually download this. And I can very quickly, straight from this transaction file, order third-party services. And finally, under call logs, I can log any phone calls from this transaction. So that's the transaction manager. That's how you can comprehensively manage any of your transactions. Pretty nice because you're able to apply these templates with the forms you need, the documents you need. You're able to import from either the MLS or the tax records. For listings, if you use the MLS data entry form, you can upload them directly into Matrix. You can come in, you can upload revisions to these documents. You can generate signings straight from here. Lots of good stuff. What we're going to do now, we have about 15 minutes left. I'm going to show you a few other features in TransactionDesk, a few other of these menu options, and we're going to end the morning by me walking you through an Authentisign signing. Let's see. A few questions that came in, and the reason why I'm sharing these questions, I just want to make sure that everyone here is going to figure if one person has the question, several might have it. We had a question for the fax back cover sheet. So when we use that, when someone faxes something to us and it gets digitized and emailed to us, it will come through whatever email we have tied to our TransactionDesk account. That's how we'll be notified when something's sent back to us. So whatever email you have under your preferences, that is how we will. That's how we would do that. Let's see. So I think that's it for the unanswered questions. I'm going to show you a few other features, and then once again, we'll walk through Authentisign. So I showed you how under any individual transaction, you can actually view your tasks. You have your checklist, which has both documents and tasks. Then you have an area just for the transaction task manager. But under this task manager icon on your main TransactionDesk menu, I can view all withstanding tasks for all of my transactions. So here they are for all my transactions. I might have multiple. I can view these as a PDF, a single PDF list. I can also view this as a calendar, an overall calendar. I can add new tasks in directly through here. So that's the task manager. So it just allows me to see just a more overall calendar or list of upcoming items that I have to complete. We looked at incident forms already. We're going to do Authentisign last. Let's spend a little bit of time looking at DocBox. DocBox is the free cloud-based storage that comes with TransactionDesk. Now, one of the first things about DocBox is that whenever I create a transaction file and I add documents into that transaction, come here to transaction folders, and those are all here in my DocBox account. This is a great way when you're on the road, we need to access your documents. If you log in through TransactionDesk, mfr.transactiondesk.com, you can go straight to this DocBox icon, and you can view any of your transaction documents for any of your transactions. When someone faxes something back to you with that fax back cover sheet, it will actually go into DocBox as well. When you use Authentisign, and when the form or document is fully signed and executed, it will appear in the transaction folder in both TransactionDesk and in DocBox. So under these transaction folders, some things will actually automatically be populated for you.
Hey, Chris?
Yes?
Sorry to interrupt you, but we had like 6 questions in a row come in, so I don't want to get too far ahead. Can you take a look?
Let's answer some of those. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Does this TransactionDesk calendar integrate with Outlook? Unfortunately, right now, no. So this is going to be a separate calendar in TransactionDesk. Who can view the contacts entered into TransactionDesk? Also, will it populate a contact from Matrix? Unfortunately, not right now. You would have to manually enter your contacts into TransactionDesk. You are able, though, to import from Google, from your Google contacts. The only ones who can see your contacts will be you and any of the super users in your office. So your broker or office admin who has the super user access. They're the only ones who have access to your items. How can I delete old transactions without my broker being notified by email? He just received 130 emails. That's a great question. Your broker will actually have to go into his or her setup options, and under notifications, brokers have the option to determine what they want to be notified to do. So if the broker wants to be notified about transaction changes or transactions being deleted, they can go through here and they can turn off the email notifications. If your broker has any questions, they can contact us, but your broker has to manually go under Setup, Notifications, and turn off those notifications. Is there a way to merge data? It looks like that question wasn't completed. Let's see. What I'm assuming that's answering about merging data, when you create a transaction, say if you add forms in after the fact, so I'll just go into any random transaction, the one that we did earlier today, come into this form, come into my forms. If I made some updates to the transaction or to the property, I have the option to auto-populate with whatever the current data is for this transaction, or if I select multiple forms and come to the basket, I can click this icon over here, and I can mass auto-populate. I also have the option with various forms, come to the basket, I can merge forms into a single PDF or a zip file. Another question that came through, is this Dropbox different from the existing Dropbox? Okay, this where it gets a little confusing. Through TransactionDesk, the cloud-based storage is called DocBox. There's another cloud-based storage called Dropbox. So DocBox is going to be the storage within TransactionDesk. The benefits of DocBox is that, number one, it pulls in all your transaction documents in one place. So all the documents for each of my transactions come here in a single folder. I also can upload my own documents into DocBox. Click Add. I can upload any documents I want, including documents from my cloud-based storage accounts, including Dropbox, Google Drive, and OneDrive. So even though DocBox is separate, I can very quickly bring items in from my Dropbox account or Google Drive account into my DocBox account. I can actually organize folders in DocBox. I can share documents through DocBox. So if I come to the stoplight menu for any of my documents, I can mark these up. I can share these documents, upload revisions. And if someone actually shares a document with me, there's going to be a folder in my DocBox account for shared documents. But here's one more thing about DocBox. If I come to my setup menu down here and come to my program settings, so setup, program settings, I have a print driver that I can download. This DocBox print driver allows you to print any document from your computer as a PDF and assign it directly into your DocBox account or even into an individual transaction file. So I'm in my computer, I'm in a Word document, I'm in an Excel spreadsheet. I can go and use the DocBox print driver, and versus printing the document on paper, I can send that document straight into DocBox and even tied to a specific transaction. So these are some of the different options, some of the things you can do with DocBox that makes DocBox somewhat unique versus your Google Drive, your Dropbox, your OneDrive. Now, use as many cloud-based storage accounts as you want. This is simply the one that's built into TransactionDesk. To my knowledge, you have pretty much unlimited storage. I don't know the exact amount, but I know it's high. We got a question on DocuSign. I'm going to hold off on that question because we're going to actually address that in a few minutes. But let me see if there's any other Dropbox questions that came in. But anyway, so these are some pretty fancy items you have with this DocBox. One more thing to show you before we go into Authentisign, the Instant Fax feature. So I showed you how in any transaction you create, one of the documents in the transaction is called a fax back cover sheet. where a customer can fax an item back to you. It gets scanned, emailed to you, plus filed in TransactionDesk, filed in DocBox under that individual transaction file. But here's the opposite. Here is what you would use in a case where you have paper documents that you need to get to a customer. Maybe you need to get this to a customer and you have a fax machine, but you want to be emailed to them. You can create a instant fax cover sheet where any paper document that you send through a fax machine will get digitized and emailed to your customer. So let's do a scenario that you have condo docs, maybe 50 pages of condo docs, and you don't have a scanner on hand, but you do have a fax machine. You're on the road, you're staying in a hotel, and you have it in your briefcase, and you want to now send these documents through a fax machine but get emailed to your customer. Simply type in the recipient's email address, the subject, a message if you want, and now I can create this fax cover sheet. So this cover sheet, I'm sorry, not the instant fax cover sheet, I can now fax the documents with this cover sheet to this number. This barcode digitizes the document, plus it's going to email the documents I fax to the recipient's email address versus their fax machine. So that's another neat feature if you have a fax machine, but you want to use your fax machine almost as a scanner. So let's see. The last thing we're going to cover, so we looked at a wide variety of features in TransactionDesk. We looked at the dashboard that you can customize. And remember, this new version of TransactionDesk is a single integrated dashboard, no more Lite, no more Pro. We looked at setting up our preferences. We looked at setting up our clauses, our templates, our sharing groups, our service providers, our checklists, all the things we want to do to go and configure. We then looked at how to work with individual forms if we ever just need to use a standalone form and not use the actual transaction features. But then we looked at how to integrate this all into a transaction. Create a transaction, apply a template to the transaction with forms and documents, import the transaction from either the MLS or from the tax records. We can use our checklist, we can use our task manager. We have our overall task manager here on the main menu with all the tasks for all of our transactions coming up. We looked at the cloud-based storage through DocBox, which automatically has documents from all of our transactions. We can also upload documents straight into DocBox, or we can download the print driver under Setup, Program Settings, download the print driver so that way we can send anything from our computer directly into DocBox, even tied to an individual transaction. We looked at Instant Fax, where we can actually create a fax cover sheet, send it through a fax machine, and the barcode will actually not only digitize the document, but also email it to the recipient. But now let's look briefly at Authentisign. Authentisign is the e-signing program that's integrated with TransactionDesk. Now, some of you might use DocuSign, some of you might use other signing services, and that's fine. But TransactionDesk is fully integrated with Authentisign. There is an additional cost for Authentisign. It is $35 for the entire year, unlimited digital signatures. So while other signing services can cost as much as anywhere between $60 and $100 plus a year, Authentisign, once again, $35 for the year. So it is a very good rate for MFR and LS subscribers. So I want to create a new signing now. I'm in Authentisign, and I'll add in a new signing, name the signing, and then if I am actually going to do a signing in conjunction with a transaction, I choose the transaction. Save this. So now I go through the steps. So I name the signing. I decide the order that I want to sign. And a lot of alliteration here. Sign in line or simulsign. How do you want this document signed? Does each participant have to sign it in a particular linear order? Or is this just going to be first come, first serve? You need 4 signatures. You don't care what order they sign it in. Under advanced options, I can set an expiration to my signing. I can set reminders to go out before the signing is due. Then we come into signing participants. I can add signers from scratch, straight from here. Add signers from the transaction contacts or from my overall TransactionDesk contacts, or add myself. I'll add from the transaction. I can go ahead and just I'll add myself just for simplicity. Single signer. Then we come down into documents, and here's where I choose all of the forms and documents that I want. In the transaction. So come to documents, and I can add forms and documents from the transaction, from the forms in TransactionDesk, straight from the form library, from DocBox, from my Google Drive, Dropbox, or OneDrive, or straight from my device. I'll add from the transaction. So I want to put in here the MLS data entry form and the listing agreement. Add. So now I can assign roles. Well, who's the seller? Who's the agent? I'm going to put myself in under every role. But if I have multiple signers, I can assign each signer a specific role for these contracts. Save. And now I can come to the last step of this wizard, the design. Oh, and by the way, for those of you already using Authentisign, Authentisign has not changed with this new version. So now I have these items in from the transaction. For the forms, the initials are automatically populated for you, along with the signature block, automatically populated for you. However, if I put in a static document from my office, I can come to this drag and drop, and I can drag in places where someone has to sign, or someone has to initial, type something in with this text box, check a box, date. So I'm actually able to bring in these initial or signature blocks and set my own document. I can then apply a layout to the document. I can save this layout, and that way I can apply it in the future whenever I'm working with this form in the future. Under markup, I can use those markup tools we saw earlier, get a text box, type something into here, use the pen, the circle, highlighter, cross out. So I can either drag and drop. Drag and drop is how I want the signer to use the document. I type something in, sign, initial. Markup is for me to modify the document straight in Authentisign. And when I'm done, when I'm ready to go, oh, by the way, I can configure this for every individual signer up here. I can either send out customized invitations to sign or send out a blanket invitation. So I'll send out the blanket invitation. So now what happens, the customer receives the invitation to sign. And they can click to start the process. And they're able to either draw their own signature or select the font size. Remember that with digital signatures, it's really the authentication certificate behind the signatures that matter. So how they want to sign it doesn't really matter. They can select the font, or they can draw their own signature, as I did. They accept the terms, and now they just click this button up here to start the signing. and just go through each place the person has to sign. Remember, I'm multiple roles right now, so but normally they will just initial under their role only. And each person will have a different place where they would have to initial. Remember, when you configure the signing, it's configured with each person signing in the right place. Complete signing. And when it's complete, the person who created the signing gets an email from Authentisign saying, okay, a signing action has been completed. Now, even better, once all signatures are received, now if you are doing the sign in line where each signer has to sign in order, once the first person signs, then the second person receives the email that they have to sign the document. But once this is all said and done, you will then receive an email from Authentisign that the signing is complete, the document is complete. The document then gets filed under the transaction folder in TransactionDesk, plus the fully signed document gets emailed to you. So I'll show you the example here. Oh, I'm sorry, here it came through. So now that all signers have signed, I get emailed the final signed document. Click here to view the signed document. And I can see it with all the signatures. Or go into the transaction, and under the documents, the signed documents are now showing up under the transaction documents, both under that transaction file and under DocBox. So whenever a document is fully signed, it automatically gets filed under that transaction file. So that really is TransactionDesk and Authentisign.